Archaeologists in Norway just identified the skeletal remains of an Old Norse man who was mentioned in a Viking saga almost 800 years ago. Was that confusing? Let me break it down. In the year 1938, researchers originally found skeletal remains at the bottom of a well at a place called Sverreborg's Castle in Trondheim, Norway. These skeletal remains were buried under a bunch of rocks at the bottom of the well, and they kind of dug it up and have been looking at it periodically over the past almost 100 years. This new study radiocarbon dated and genomic tested or genome sequenced the remains in order to better identify who this individual may be. And as it turns out, he dates back almost to the exact time period as a figure mentioned anonymously in a Viking saga. Sverri's saga, to be specific. So you might think, oh, well, why is this a big deal? If he's talked about in the saga, we already know he's there, right? Well, here's the thing. Sagas are not always 100% true. So when we see something written in there and we find something in real life, you can't always put the pieces together because there might be some basis in fact, it might be completely made up, or something in between. Basically, Norse stories are broken down into two types. You have the Eddas and you have the sagas. The Eddas are poems. There's really only two of them, the Poetic and the Prose Edda. And they're pretty much the big first-person identifying source that we have on Viking mythology, Norse legends and heroes and mythic figures and monsters and gods and yada yada. Everything you know about Norse mythology is probably referenced somewhere in these two documents. A lot of times these sagas also feature mythological beings. You know, they'll have dragons such as Fafnir and Nidhogger, or they might have the undead Draugr that are mentioned a lot in the Iceland area. But a lot of times they also have a basis in fact. They'll talk about individuals or events that were real and historical, such as in Orkney Inga saga or in Vinland saga. No, not that. Good show, but not that. In any case, Sverri's saga seems to be a little bit more factual than some of the other ones. It follows the story of King Sverri of Norway, who is trying to become king and reclaim areas from usurpers or foreign bodies and what have you. The big thing about this saga is that it appears to be written by a contemporary source as the events are happening. That is to say, King Sverri had a guy that he just had follow him around and write down what was going on. A lot of people will akin it to almost like a political autobiography or a massive propaganda piece, but if it is having some sort of basis in fact, it's an incredible first-person account of actual events that were happening in the latest end of the 12th century. In any case, the skeletal remains of this individual, whose discovery, by the way, was prophesized on the internet not too long ago. That's a joke. In the saga, the anonymous man is referenced with one line. They took a dead body and they cast it into the well and they covered him up with stones. This body, which was found at the bottom of a well at Sverreborg's castle, covered in stones and dating to that time period, can almost assuredly be called that individual. Not that we want to make any conclusions. We don't know for certain. Now, we can ascertain from the saga that the reason the man was thrown in the well was to poison the water supply so that Sverri and his men in the fort would potentially get sick or have to surrender. The curious part, though, is that the genome testing done on the skeletal remains show that he was more identified genetically with someone from southern Norway, which is where the group attacking was from. So that means that either he had some sort of movement that happened in his life or in his ancestry which brought him to central Norway to be under Sverri's control, or he was one of the attacking force's soldiers that they just kind of threw in the well as like a final act of good for the attacking force. At the very least, this is a fascinating look at why it's so important to try and preserve archaeological remains and their context. This was a body found almost 100 years ago, which we are now making discoveries about with new technologies and methods that are available to us today. Who knows what we will be able to do in the future with things that we're finding today? The article was published and is available to read on iScience Source.